I'm going to introduce our panellists today. So if I could please ask Dan Bognar, Gary Sterrenberg, Peter Alexander, and AIIA Kavaler, who we've met before, to come to the stage, please. Thank you, gentlemen. So, as Beverly mentioned, as the guys get up and get in their places, we're going to basically have our first panel session around the customer perspective of the digital engagement of the government. So, I just wanted to say, obviously, we've met Dan and Addy before earlier today, but I just wanted to say a few words of introduction to Peter. So Peter is the first Assistant Secretary of Projects, Procurement and Assurance at the Digital Transformation Agency. He's responsible for the whole of the government identity project, digital marketplace, IC procurement, policy, and the new Digital Investment Management Office. So welcome, Peter. Thank you for your time today. I now move on to Gary. Gary has been the Chief Information Officer, Department of Human Services since October 2011. He's responsible for the infrastructure and applications underpinning the operations of all ICT within the DHS, supporting around 38,000 staff and the delivery of services and payment to customers. So welcome, Gary. Thank you for your time today. So just in the interest of time, I'm going to ask our panelists to give a short 2 or 3 minute overview of their perspective of the customer engagement with government, and then I'm going to open it to questions. So we'll try and move fairly quickly so we keep on time, and also we get as many questions as we can from the audience. So with that, I'll ask Dan to kick us off, if I may, please.
Sure, happy to. So I think the thing that's important to keep in mind here is that we are all customers of brands and government agencies, and I think that often that really needs to be our guiding light and a guiding principle, because the experience that we get in our consumer lives is really what shapes our expectations as we engage with government. And that's why some of the examples we talked about this morning are so important, because that really, as a consumer, really shapes what we expect. A couple of examples that I can talk to, because I think stories really tell it in a great way. We've done some really innovative projects. One is Service New South Wales. If you're not familiar with Service New South Wales, what they effectively wanted to do was set themselves up as the front door for engagement between the citizen and New South Wales government. So rather than going to the RTA to get a driver's licence and then births, marriage and deaths to get a birth certificate or a death certificate, or licensing registration to get a fishing licence, or whatever it might be, they would effectively service the customer's needs from a single point of entry. And they'd do that across digital and phone and store. And one of the ideas we had to them, which we really borrowed from our experience as consumers, is to say, well, it's one thing to be able to provide those channels, but wouldn't it be great if we could actually set up a portal where the consumer could log into an environment and they could actually see all of the relationships that they had with New South Wales government, and from there they could renew automatically their licence, they could pose a service request, they could look up knowledge articles or what have you. And that actually got deployed last year under the banner of My Service New South Wales. And so every New South Wales citizen now has a private space that they go to, which is authenticated and secure, and they can manage their relationship in totality. Another great example is Transport for New South Wales. We started working with them around really complaints management, which is not an exciting topic, but it was really to help them be able to just manage all of the complaints that consumers had around changes to the public transport network or late buses or trains or what have you. And what they realised as they started to do that is actually what it was about the customer journey. And so now if we fast forward to today, the problem we're working on with them is to say, if there is a disruption in the network, how do we proactively target consumers that we know have that trip planned, because we know that much about them because they take that bus every day or they take that ferry every day. And not only can I just notify them, but can I proactively suggest for them an alternative route and provide them some options how to get there and how to pay for it on their Opal card. That's really taking this to a whole nother level. And so the technology that we talked about today can really be used in highly innovative ways. But as I started, I think it comes down to defining, based on our own expectations, what would we like to see? Often consumers don't really know what they want, and I think our job is to define the future for them and let them arrive at that destination. I think that's really an opportunity for all of us.
Thank you, Dan. So we'll move on to the CIO's perspective now. So Gary, could you maybe share your thoughts?
Just from my perspective, I think the Australian public are demanding a very different brand of servicing from government. Trust has always been a significant part of the relationship between government and the public service, and obviously the citizen. And it's not just trust in government, but trust in the channel that they use, and also trust in the information that they get from that channel. What we've seen, though, in a social servicing perspective, they want something more. They want an empathy. They want an understanding, not just a static experience, if you would. So I'm very excited about where the technology is coming. We've seen the blending of what some people call expressive computing with the conversational UI and various other technologies binding together to allow us to create those experiences that are empathetic, that are understanding, that allow us to interact with the citizens in a very, very different way. The expectations have never been greater in terms of what people expect from government, not just the transparency of what we do, but everybody seems to have an opinion nowadays around whether it's good or bad, and particularly around government service platforms, as they should. And part of being in the public service has been open to scrutiny. But the level of expectation is certainly greater than what we are delivering today. And so what we're excited about is the new technologies are allowing us for the first time to put together a servicing paradigm that comes close to meeting those paradigms, or expectations rather, of the citizens of the day.
Okay, thank you. Peter.
So kind of three things on this. So we absolutely have to put users of our services first, consumers, customers, businesses, immigrants, whatever you might call them, and think about how we service those people. But we have, of course, quite a significant challenge in government, which is kind of the two L's that we run into consistently, which is legacy and legislation. And they're tough to deal with. The government has challenges when we think about service delivery, in terms of investment and making decisions in what we invest in, because of course governments, and this is, we have to decide whether we're going to build a new system or invest in education, and so the toss-up of kind of innovation and dealing with taking things forward is really hard in government, of course, because if something ain't broke and you can deliver a service in a way that works, why wouldn't you keep doing that and invest in other things? But of course it hampers innovation and our ability to take things forward. So we've got to kind of get that balance right. The comment about demand supply that was made a second ago, I'd really like to focus on, because that is an interesting inhibitor for government as well. So almost any great innovation that's ever happened has been supply side. It hasn't been, you go to the classics of people weren't sitting there listening to the radio going, wouldn't it be great if I could watch pictures on this? Or people weren't sitting in their horse and cart going, wouldn't it be great if I didn't have a horse but I had an engine in this and it went, so all supply side. So for government, in terms of how we take things forward as an innovator and driving supply, we can do that. We've got fantastic capability in organisations like DHS, but we've got to be cautious, because we start looking a bit creepy when we start driving some of that supply side innovation. So we've got to kind of get that right. But I would say, as a third point, there's never been a better opportunity to kind of get that balance right, work with industry, work with other jurisdictions and sectors where things are going forward, and we are seeing great innovation and leveraging that and using it to deliver government services.
Great, thank you, Peter. So I'll close off with Addy. If you could maybe share your comments. If there's anything creepy you can share with us, that seems to be a key topic this morning.
Yeah. No, I think that most of the things are already said. I think that in one hand, the user expectations are there, and it's derived from the consumer experience that now kind of brought into the organization and brought into the expectations from kind of a government and so forth. At the same time, all the tools and all the processes are already available as well for supporting the agile and to move fast without compromising on the quality. From that perspective. One thing is just to remember, there are no magic, and there's also the cultural aspect of doing this kind of this shift into agile, introduced kind of a new role in the organizations and kind of a new opportunities, if you like. And the tricky thing is going to be how to win that in a way to integrate this whole thing and bring together the culture the culture change, the technology change, and the processes all together at a given time. So again, the good news is that it's all here, and there's a lot of different practices to share and leverage some experiences from others. So it's my 2 cents.
Great, thank you, Eddie. Okay, we come to the opportunity to open some questions to the floor. I think we've got a couple of roaming microphones that will be going around, so please step forward. First question here.
Hello. My name's Miranda. I work in the ATO security area, and obviously we have quite a lot of challenges in our space where we're sort of opening up a lot of our APIs to the marketplace and to software developers and the like. Understanding that, I guess we're operating in an increasingly digital environment, we're seeing a proportionate increase in cyber threats and cyber crime, as another example. How do you propose, what types of mitigations do you see as being the most effective to manage these risks, to ensure that we're protecting our Australian public's community data as well?
Okay, really good question to start. Gentlemen, who would like to...
I'd say the challenge in that space is I don't even think it's a proportionate increase in cyber threat, it's a disproportionate increase. And so how do we protect it? Look, I think the way we protect it and the way we manage those risks or mitigate those risks is as we move into we're in the digital world, as we build new systems, as we build capability to share, we have to be cognizant and build our systems to good standards where we understand the risks and issues. I mean, we're not going to get them all. I think one thing we do need to build towards is a system of remedy for when we fail. Because ask any privacy commissioner, what's the chances of us failing? It's 100%. We will fail, whether it's en masse or at a micro level. So the way to build for success is to plan for failure and deal with that when it happens. So we should build robust systems with good controls and arrangements, but understand that we fail. So work out how we do that. We've had 2 really interesting examples in Australia in the last little while of pretty significant data breaches. I'll talk about the more positive one, which was the Red Cross. So the Red Cross lost some data. I mean, it wasn't quite a data breach. It was sharing some data that went a bit awry. But they got on the front foot. They talked about it. They got out in the press. They said what they were doing about it. And it was a blip in the newspapers. I think it got a tiny bit of coverage and then disappeared because people weren't that interested in it. What was really interesting was, and should have got lots of press, was just how great they were in their response. So I think that kind of approach is a really positive one. Of course, as we move into a world where we're going to have mandatory breach notification in Australia before too long, we're getting into that space. So controls are important for your systems, but also dealing with the response of when things go wrong, I think we need to be prepared for.
I have a different view to Peter. It's my view that we don't talk about these things. It just invites people to have a go. But to your point, what I do agree with Peter is that certainly we're going to have more and more open government platforms. I think that day of having ability to ring fence and control cyber from the perimeter is gone. I think to the conversations earlier, it's also, you can't employ enough people to look at the logs and that. You need a form of machine learning to be able to take that information, to be one step ahead, to be constantly scanning the environment that you're in. The techniques are getting extremely sophisticated from the external point of view. And so what we've seen is an increase in not just the type of fraud activities you normally see, but a lot of criminal activities around ransomware and various other things going down. I think it's going to be one of those things where the government has to relook at its strategies around cyber. We have to get ahead of the game and the curve, certainly in those agencies that are customer and business facing. So I think it's going to be, we're going to have to fight to catch up, is my view.
I think there's also an opportunity here to learn from the experience in the private sector. I'll give you an example. So Salesforce, we do about 4 billion transactions a day on our infrastructure, and about 40% of those transactions are API-based transactions, which is either system to system, or we actually have an ecosystem of 3,000 partner organisations that build applications on our technology, so they're independent technology. We were actually, the long story is, we actually, our CEO gave Steve Jobs the name App Store. We had that registered many years ago. We actually called it App Exchange instead of App Store subsequent. But what we did is we built an ecosystem of 3,000 partners that build on our technology or integrate to our technology through the APIs. And what we do is we ensure a couple of things. Firstly, when they do a release of their application, we have to certify from a security perspective that there is no breach whatsoever on the security of our underlying technology. That's super important. But you also have to think about it in terms of what's happening in the platform itself. So to your point, we have event monitoring capability that's monitoring, activity inside the organisation. Also, data encryption becomes really important, both at rest and in transit. So I think there's models that you can learn from in the private sector. It's business models that have existed for some time.
Yeah, my 2 cents, if I may.
No, go, please, please, quickly.
No, I think it's a spot-on question, and I think that the more you open things up and you kind of RESTful enable, the backend system, the more you expose, so no question about that. But I think at least from my side, is that you should look at that from 2 different angles, like what I call the pre-production and the post-production. On the pre-production, there's a lot of things that you can try to test or avoid based on machine learning about behaviors that happen from security breach perspective, and you can deploy that as a testing capabilities. You can scan, you can do security scans today, pre-production. You can do resilience testing and kind of bombard the application in advance on all those different security related or performance related or functional related. This whole thing, the technologies exist today. So this is all the things that you can do like pre-production even before getting the apps out there. And then once the app is out there, to your point, I agree. There's a lot of different tools, from HPE, from others probably, that can kind of monitor these behaviors. There's a lot of security capabilities out there to do things like from data protection to encryption to all of those different things. So I think there is a way to look at it end to end and to still innovate, go faster, but in a very secure way.
I think one of the things that we're doing that you might find interesting, being from the AIIA, is that DHS has challenged the other agencies to a cyber war game, which is going to be fought out around September, because our view is that you need to be able to learn how to attack before you can learn to defend. So we're going to use the agencies to help get the skills up by having these annual games whereby we can hone our skills in the defensive arts.
Great, thank you. Really good questions, some good feedback from our panellists there. Is there any other questions? Just out of interest of time, I'll probably just ask 2 of the panel members to answer this. So if you could maybe say if you've got a particular person you'd like to go first, just to put them on the spot, that would help as well.
Hannon from Salesforce, and it's probably for Gary and Peter. We've heard a lot this morning about meeting the expectations of citizens and that private versus public sector expectations, that type of thing. I'm interested from your insider point of view, how do you go about measuring those expectations? And I guess, Gary, I'll give you a specific example, even though it's slightly obscure. If I get a childcare rebate, how do you measure whether or not I want to respond to you via Snapchat? As an obscure example, how important is that in your ongoing technology map and how do you go about measuring those expectations?
Look, it's fair to say, a year ago I'd have given you a very different answer, because we were very traditional in our approach of doing the usual survey of citizens. I think our new relationship with the DTA has taken us to a very new level, where we are actually engaging with citizens before we even take the software out. So collectively, the DTA has not only provided us with a methodology, but they are part of our delivery mechanism to engage citizens in how that particular cohort or citizen group want to engage with us and how they see it. So literally before it is even put out there into the public, we have some real insights from the people that are going to be using our systems rather than public servants and others.
Okay. And I think I'd add the interesting kind of dynamic we'll have going forward more and more is, if you've got multiple channels, we'll monitor them, analyse them, and you'll shape your services to those. So the ones that are winners you'll put more effort into. The ones that people aren't using, you'll manage as kind of lower impact channels. So I think there'll be much more development based on use.
But I think there's your point. I think there's some interesting channels around messaging and WhatsApp. We are really interested to see where that goes off, that takes off, because I think it could change the game. I heard the previous speaker talk about conversational UI. We think that's the next thing, the next sort of like level of sophistication that we're going to be building into our systems, because that just changes the game in terms of the way we engage with citizens. But we're always open to see where the industry is going, because you really want the channels that people want to use rather than what we're forcing them to use.
Okay, thank you. I think we've got time for one more question. This gentleman here is...
Thank you. Gary, don't build that. Come and talk to me. We're developing that digital readiness index, which essentially measures, to your point, the preference of primary channels, the perception of the primary and secondary channels, and the availability of those channels. And it's a reasonably complicated model behind that. But the question that I wanted to put to the panel is more from the customer perspective, because that was the title of the panel. In some of the research I've been doing, up to about 78% of the people expect the government to nudge them towards making better choices. So in a kind of social anthropological nature of the question, how do you take account both of that kind of choice architecture, but importantly of what the channels mean in terms of kind of cyberspace cultures and behaviors, and essentially deliver what you want in the way that the customers expect it?
From my side, the customers are driving us at the moment. They're way ahead of the game in terms of the expectations of how they want to engage with government. I think it's up to us to, as Peter said, to in some ways explore I think we've got some initiatives with Peter's crowd to do some trials and innovation. But I think I'm more interested in partnering with others. There's some interesting channels. I think we can get a lot more about through the Internet of Things, where we use others as the primary connection point of the channel. It doesn't have to be a government channel to get the data. It could go through industry, whether it's not-for-profit or others that can extend our service. Our concept is one of a service ecosystem. There's no need for government to get in the way of good servicing, if you would. There's a way that we can facilitate and do the role that we're meant to do, in some ways providing the platforms and the infrastructure capability. But essentially what a government does, it facilitates the payment of a service or product between a citizen and a service provider. So we've got to kind of work at how our role is and how we position these government platforms to facilitate that engagement and to make it as seamless as possible so that we don't impost on people's lives.
Okay, thank you. We've got time for one more view on that topic, if anyone's got a... No? Hopefully that answers your question. So I think we're pretty much at time. So I'd like to take the opportunity on behalf of Lenovo and the AIIA to thank the panel for your time.